Order, order. Angela Croyd to move the motion.
Thank you. I would like to move that this House considers the potential merits of devolving employment law to Scotland. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Edward, and the Minister will recall that I have spent many hours in this place calling for the reforms of employment law. The Minister will also be aware of the backlash from unions that the employment bill was nowhere to be seen in the most recent Queen's speech. Indeed, Francis O'Grady of the Trade Union Council highlighted that vital rights that ministers have promised, like flexible working, fair tips, protection from pregnancy discrimination, are at risk of being ditched for good. The fact is, this government needs to get a grip on workers' rights. And if it refuses to do so, then now is the time to devolve employment law powers to Scotland to allow the Scottish Government to enact her own reforms. Now, the SNP Scottish Government is doing everything in its power to improve workers' rights where it has devolved competence. Throughout the pandemic, the Scottish Government has worked to prioritise workers' rights, calling on employers, trade unions, workers and to work together during this challenging time to ensure that workers are treated fairly. Now, the SNP Government refreshed its Scottish Business Pledge to align with the Fair Work principles, established a new learning network and an international Fair Work summit. The Scottish Government published a Fair Work Action Plan in February of 2019, which set out a range of measures to support employers to embed fairer working practices, and this is supported by trade unions across Scotland. Additionally, the Scottish Government published a Gender Pay Gap Action Plan in 2019, bringing together a cross-government group to approach the gendered impact of inequality in the labour market. Now, the Scottish Government is also a champion of the real living wage, which is the utmost importance during this cost of living crisis. Nearly 1,500 living wage accredited employers in Scotland, giving Scotland the highest rate of workers in the UK earning a real living wage. Within the limited powers that the Scottish Government currently holds, it has worked hard to tackle in-work poverty and to support those in low incomes, and ultimately to condemn exploitative zero-hour contracts by establishing a Fair Work Convention to support the Fair Pay and Coalition's conditions agenda. But Scotland can only go so far with employment law reserved to the UK Government. It is only able to address part of the problem. Full devolution of employment law would allow Scotland to go even further, create fairer workplaces, increase wages, reduce insecure work, and fundamentally tackle work poverty head-on. Shifting this power to Scotland will allow them to stop the race to the bottom on workers' rights, as we are seeing with the post-Brexit UK. Chair, last December, the European Union delivered employee status to gig economy workers, untying them from the constraints of self-employment status and allowing basic employment rights such as minimum wage, holidays and sick leave. This reform of workers' rights in the EU may well have been one of the most ambitious extensions of workers' rights from Brussels since Britain left the EU, and we are missing out. Since leaving the EU, the UK Government has been complacent on updating employment law to tackle the injustices faced by the UK workforce. Now, Scotland overwhelmingly supported remaining and retaining EU membership and is in no small part due to its commitment to the extension and promotion of workers' rights. Instead, the UK Government approach appears to be to leave workers to appeal to the courts, as in the case of Uber and Addison Lee cases, where they cannot access justice without the reforms of the existing legislation. Workers are left at the mercy of rogue employers. In 2019, this UK Government was elected on a manifesto which promised to introduce measures to protect those in low-paid work and the gig economy. This was embodied in the promise of an employment bill which would protect and enhance workers' rights, with the tagline, "Making Britain the best place in the world to work."
Well, thank you for that point.
I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend to raise a very important point. The Taylor report reported 5 years ago and made recommendations to the government to do things quickly, including simplifying worker status. Does my honourable friend share my concern that the government have sat in that report for 5 years with no action?
I thank my honourable friend for that point. The Taylor report gave the government a comprehensive list of items that it could address, and sadly it has been sleeping on the job. However, while there was no commitment in this year's Queen's speech to bring forward the promises of reforms of employment law, perhaps the government now has an opportunity to bring that forward. Therefore, I would like to ask the Minister why we should trust this government to place workers' rights as a priority when 3 years after that promise was made, no employment bill has yet to materialise. Chair, we have already seen the ambitions of the UK government slip. Now we are knee-deep in pandemic recovery, a cost of living crisis and a looming recession. It is imperative that this government makes a concrete commitment to improving workers' rights. The pandemic has exacerbated... I will give it.
I thank my friend for giving way. And before she moves on, you can expect the Tories to denigrate or at the very least be uncaring sometimes on workers' rights, but you have to be honest here that the Labour Party, certainly in Scotland, have got something to answer. They denied, indeed, they fought equal pay for women for decades, and then the minute they left office in Glasgow started campaigning for it, they voted against higher offers to council workers, and they stopped the devolution of employment law when in the Smith Commission. Had they supported the SNP when in the Smith Commission, then I wouldn't have had to bring forward 3 bills to outlaw, fire and rehire. Would you agree with that?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I think it's fair to say that Labour, like the government, have also been sleeping on the job when it comes to protecting workers' rights here in the UK government. They've failed to stand up for workers and often been missing on picket lines for that matter as well. The pandemic has exacerbated a steady entrenchment of precarious working conditions across the UK. More and more people in the UK are relying on zero-hours contracts and participating in the gig economy than ever before. It's simply a sad fact that when workers have to turn away a job because it would cost them more money to physically attend that job in terms of the cost of driving to pick up or collect an item to deliver it, they simply can't afford because the wages are so low. How is it that here in the UK wages are so low, workers' rights are so abysmal that a worker cannot even afford to attend work to earn money in the first place? It is absolutely absurd, and that is the position that we find ourselves in, with an apparent Labour government set to potentially take over at the next general election, again also sleeping on the job.
The honourable member give way.
I will give way.
Thank you very much. I thank the honourable member for giving way, but I would say that what she says at the moment leads me more to think that what we need is reform of UK employment law rather than devolution of employment law, which would create new barriers to doing business and running services across the UK. And while I would wholeheartedly support the reform of UK employment law, I worry about the implications for companies like RBS that have staff all over the country and the nightmares it would cause in terms of employment rights and breaking up the single market.
The member makes a number of points. Now, that you, more than anyone, will know that your ardent belief in this union would in and of itself argue that this is the best place in the world to protect workers' rights, and yet we on these benches have repeatedly, in every facet, in every form, in every piece of legislation, attempted to encourage the government to reform employment law, and it has failed to do so.
It's one for giving way, but does she, like me, find it rather bizarre that the Honourable Lady from Edinburgh West seems to overlook the fact that our Honourable friend from Eastern Bartonshire's predecessor was the Employment Minister in a Lib Dem coalition? So if there was so much of a need to reform employment law, why didn't the Lib Dems do that?
Absolutely. There was an ample opportunity when the Lib Dems were in coalition to transform employment law, and that did not happen. I will move on and make some progress, but I will come back. Now, there are more and more people in insecure work, more and more people with insecure wages, and more people with insecure rights in the workplace. More people are underemployed, more people are holding down multiple jobs and yet struggling to support themselves. And sadly, more and more people are struggling to invoke their workplace rights and unionise. In real terms, this means more people have been plunged into in-work poverty and are unable to rely on stable incomes, which is invaluable to those trying to make their headway through this winter as we approach a cost of living crisis and a bleak winter for many, many families. The impact of this pandemic is clear, the impact of Brexit is clear, and the impact of this government's stagnation and failure to act is blatant. Now, I'm calling on the UK government to either act now or let the Scottish government do so. I would love to have every confidence that this government would bring forward an employment bill and transform employment rights, but it has failed to do so, and it doesn't appear to want to. Chair, I am deeply disappointed that there is no commitment to improving workers' rights in the Queen's speech. And the decision to shelve the employment bill represents a missed opportunity for this government to make serious progress on changing employment law. It has missed the opportunity to update policies on flexible working, carers leave, paid miscarriage leave, as I have argued time and time again, and has failed to strengthen protections against workplace sexual harassment and other equalities protections. As the Minister will recall, I have spent many hours in this place calling for the introduction of paid miscarriage leave. My colleague has pursued relentlessly the rights for neonatal leave and play, and I welcome that the Government has introduced those measures or has committed to doing so. I have pursued numerous different vehicles in this chamber and this Parliament to try to bring forward procedures to ensure that this important policy of paid miscarriage leave is introduced, but sadly I feel I'm reaching the end of the road here. The policy has cross-party support, yet it has been unable to succeed because of the archaic working practices of this place and a failure to commit to legislating on the issue from this Conservative government. This reinforces why this system will never work for Scotland. It is becoming clearer by the day that we cannot trust this Conservative government to prioritise workers' rights. Instead, we see the further entrenchment of socio-economic inequality in our society. Chair, Scotland did not vote for Brexit. Scotland did not vote for this Conservative government and has not done so successively for many years. Scotland did not vote for this latest Prime Minister, and Scotland did not vote to roll back workers' rights and leave the European Union. But yet we find ourselves in a situation where this government will not act, our government wants to act and does not have the powers to do so. I will.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend, she's been very generous. Does she share my concern, and the concern of many others, that when it comes to trade union rights, that the government seem to be wanting to roll back further and threatening trade unions that they're going to raise thresholds and make industrial action more difficult?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I know my honourable member wished to make an intervention.
Just two very brief points. I do find it a strange argument that multinational companies are somehow unable to adapt their practices to the conditions required by individual and independent countries. That is a fallacy and a fiction, I believe. Just to point to a particular reversal of rights, which I will refer to in my speech if I'm fortunate enough to be called, the government has in fact demonstrated their hostility by intending to scrap the Trades Union Wales Act, a law passed by our Senate to protect workers in Wales.
Absolutely. I thank the honourable member for making that very salient point. We can be under no illusions. This government isn't just not interested in protecting workers' rights, it's not interested in protecting the devolution settlement in Wales, Scotland or anywhere else. It's not interested in listening to people across the UK who are crying out for an urgent action on an energy cap. Now, workers in Scotland and across the UK should be under no illusion that this government represents one of the most egregious attacks on workers' rights for over a decade. And there is no signs that it will change. Given the performance of the Scottish Government in relation to workers' rights, does the Minister recognise that the UK Government is hindering the Scottish Government's ability to act and protect workers' rights in the same way as we would have done if we'd remained in the EU? It is clear that the UK Government is reluctant to take any necessary steps to overhaul employment law and to catch up with the realities of work in this current decade. If the Minister remains unwilling to address the failures of this government, then will she give the Scottish Government the powers to do so? I must ask the Minister to give serious consideration to the devolution of employment law to Scotland and to stop holding us back from delivering vital support and protections to those who need it most, especially now when they need it most.
Question